Claude Opus solved my white whale bug today that I couldn't find in 4 years. Productivity. Background. I'm a C++ dev with 30+ years experience, Xfang staff engineer. I'm generally the person on the team that other developers come to after they struggled with a problem for a week, and I would solve it while they are standing in my office. But today I was humbled by Claude Opus 4. I gave it my white whale bug, which arose from a re-architecting refactor that was done 4 years ago. The original refactor span around 60K lines of code, and it fixed a whole slew of problems, but it created a problem in an edge case when a particular shader was used in a particular way. It used to work, then we re-architected and refactored, and it no longer worked. I've been playing on and off trying to find it, and must have spent 200 hours on it over the last few years. It's one of those issues that are very annoying, but not important enough to drop everything to investigate. I worked with Claude Code running Opus for a couple of hours. I gave it access to the old code as well as the new code and told it to go find out how this was broken in the refactor. And it found it. Turns out that the reason it worked in the old code was merely by coincidence of the old architecture, and when we changed the architecture, that coincidence wasn't taken into account. So this wasn't merely an introduced logic bug. It found that the changed architecture design didn't accommodate this old edge case. This took a total of around 30 prompts and 1 restart. I've also previously tried GPT 4.1, Gemini 2.5, and Claude 3.7, and neither of them could make any progress whatsoever. But Opus 4 finally found it. Share. New to Reddit? Create your account and connect with a world of community where you thought it was working. Bugs are the worst. Congrats. And I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. 378 thoughts on peripheral issues, and Claude does a really good job of catching things that aren't explicitly stated. But before Claude 4 was released, I was almost exclusively using Gemini because it would give better results. Crazy how quick things are flipping around in the AI space. This took a total of around 30 prompts and 1 restart. Yes, this is the reality. It is an amazing tool, but it's not instant gratification. Though, after 4 years, only 30 prompts may seem instant. Good job, both of you. Machines of loving grace. How about 4.0 Sonnet? Can it also solve this? How can you be sure it was Opus that fixed the bug? In Claude Code, you have 2 choices, Default or Sonnet 4. Default lets Claude choose the model, possibly based on your remaining usage limits. It's possible that both Opus and Sonnet 4 contributed to fixing the bug, especially if the default setting was used. So can you describe how you gave access to old code and then new code? How were you able to give the context of old code when it is running in the context of new code? Is it probably like you had a root folder which has both old and new repo folders and you started Claude Code at this root? So it has access to both folders? Sorry, I'm a noob just trying out Claude Code and am not familiar with how you can have 2 instances of Claude Code running in 2 different repos but sharing some context. Sure. My natural project structure is /proj/src, and when I open VS Code, I open to /project. So it was simply a matter of copying an old version of the source to /proj/old, so both were then under /proj, and I just had to tell Claude to look at it. I also told it some files may have moved due to refactoring, which it did, but it had no problems finding anything. I gave it my white whale bug, which arose from a re-architecting refactor that was done 4 years ago. The original refactor span around 60K lines of code, and it fixed a whole slew of problems, but it created a problem in an edge case when a particular shader was used in a particular way. It used to work, then we re-architected and refactored, and it no longer worked. This recently happened to me after a 8K line refactor on Electron. I spent a week on it and even AI couldn't fix it. Then I refactored with AI and it fixed itself. Definitely would have been harder to do on my own. I worked with Claude Code running Opus for a couple of hours. I gave it access to the old code as well as the new code and told it to go find out how this was broken in the refactor. How did you give it old code access? I usually use YEK, https://github.com/bodo-run/yk, and put all the files, necessary context, in one YEK txt file, but would love to know if there's a good way to go about it. I just copied my old code folder next to the new one and pointed Claude at the common parent. How did you manage to let Claude Code work with two codebase within the same context? If you have the time and don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear more about those 30 prompts and the overall interaction flow. Things like, how did you initially frame the problem to Claude? What kind of code chunks or files did you share at each stage? How did Claude approach the analysis? Did it ask for specific files, or did you guide it? What was the breakthrough moment when it identified the architectural issue? How did the conversation evolve when you mentioned the restart? I'm particularly interested in understanding how Claude handled comparing the old versus new architecture and identified that coincidental dependency that got lost in the refactor. That kind of architectural level reasoning across a 60K line codebase sounds incredibly impressive. No worries if you don't have time for all the details, but even a high-level walkthrough of the debugging process would be really valuable for those of us trying to get better at leveraging these tools for complex problems. Initial prompt was maybe 10 lines describing the problem. I pointed it to the top-level codebase folder, which is about 1 million lines. Well, 2 million if you count the old version of the project, which was side by side to the new one underneath the parent folder. The follow-up prompts range from 1 line to 1,500 lines and contain logs that it wanted me to get after it added a whole bunch of printfs to the codebase to understand the code flow. The follow-up prompts that weren't mostly logs had details like, you're going down the wrong path. It doesn't help restricting this conditional code, insert code, to only apply to a subset of the input dataset since explain reason and this conditional insert code and that conditional insert code are not mutually exclusive in the case of explain dataset scenario, like you are assuming right now. So I basically told it about previous paths that I went down when it wanted to also take those, but I knew would lead to dead ends. Claude Code automatically found the files it needed to look in using grep. I didn't have to guide it, not even the function names. I generally make sure I start with all files closed in VS Code, otherwise it becomes overly fixated on what you have open rather than doing wide searches. It tried a bunch of things before it had the breakthrough, but as you probably know it always said, I found it. This is finally the root case of the problem, but every AI does that on almost every prompt, so it wasn't anything special. It was just another thing it did that I tested and noticed it worked without also regressing other stuff, and then I looked at it and compared it and then realized what it did. Then I had to go and delete a bunch of other unnecessary changes that Opus also did that it insisted was good to leave in and it didn't want to remove, but wasn't actually pertinent to the issue. When I restarted it was because it went on a side quest of fixing some matrix multiplication in the associated shader, and I didn't feel like spending the day doing linear algebra to figure out if it's correct or not. I didn't think that was on the correct track at all. The issue was that the shader wasn't getting executed, not that it behaved poorly. So I just restarted it and gave it back what it told me so far from one of the last results. I didn't specifically tell it to leave the GLSL alone, but it did from then on. I'm trying to distill the prompt to get it down to a single prompt that makes the change without giving away the fix, since it would be nice being able to use that to compare different models against each other. So far, I haven't been successful. I can get it down to 3 prompts to make the change in the correct file though, but not the correct fix yet. 5.